I go to the gym, I'm working out. There's only one other person in my sight, and it's Logan Paul.
George Janko has always been linked to Logan Paul and co-hosting the Impaulsive podcast. But in April 2023, George unfollowed both Logan Paul and Mike on Instagram. Last episode, he was on the Ryan Garcia interview, and since then, George has been nowhere to be seen on Impaulsive, and unlike the other times he's disappeared, this does not appear to be a prank. Curiously, there's been no official word on his absence from either him or his co-hosts. This is why it's time to take a look at all the possible reasons behind George leaving Impaulsive, how much he made from Impaulsive, and will this be the end for the Impaulsive podcast? Let's debunk this mysterious situation. Journey from previous career to Impaulsive. Although being a podcast host and a social media sensation was not always the path George Janko saw himself taking early in life, it's not too far off from his initial dreams of becoming a musician. After leaving high school, he decided to attend the Conservatory of Recording Arts and Scientists to pursue his dream, but along the way he became involved in social media and began experimenting with YouTube. He also started gaining a lot of attention and following by social media users, but he didn't begin podcasting just yet. His next path was acting and writing, and he's made several brilliant appearances in many films and television shows. George has worked with top Hollywood stars like Emma Kenny, Hassie Harrison, and Tracy Thomas. He's also been in many famous projects like Follow Me, NCIS Los Angeles, Flying High, Back to Lila, and more. Leveraging on this success, he began making a lot of influential connections, the top of which was his friendship with Logan Paul. In an interview with Page 6, he revealed that the Paul brothers, Logan and Jake, are the ones who taught him everything about business. They met over 6 years ago at a gym, and they've become friends ever since. Logan and Jake were also the ones who introduced George to pursue acting and social media content creation, for which he is known today. His connection with the Paul brothers soon went beyond friendship, and they advanced to becoming business partners. After his initial guest appearance on Impaulsive, George was invited back many times and became quite a regular on the show. Things seemed to work out even more after Logan's high school best friend Mac quit hosting the show, with George Janko taking his place until recently. George's most popular videos are those he's made in collaboration with the Paul brothers. He currently has close to 2 million followers on Instagram, 1.6 million subscribers on YouTube, 320,000 followers on Twitter, and a reach of over 4 million people on TikTok. Controversies surrounding Logan and George. Currently, George no longer follows Logan Paul across different social media platforms and has stopped appearing on the show for a while. This fact has been eye-raising, to say the least. Things became even more mysterious when on the 25th of April, George Janko made a cryptic post on Twitter where he said he wasn't going to talk before, but now he is. His tweet went viral, and it had everyone curiously brimming to know what really happened behind the scenes between George and Logan. However, digging deeper, it seems George's relationship with the brothers has been sour for a while now, and it probably came to a climax during an episode on the podcast where Logan spoke disrespectfully about Christianity. Everyone knows George is a Christian, and he was uncomfortable listening to Logan use profane words to describe God. It definitely didn't help that Logan Paul went as far as calling people who practiced Christianity silly, and he told George to seek therapy for being a practicing Christian. George got really upset during the episode, and he made his own retorts in reply to Logan's comments. His retorts obviously stemmed from the fact that he probably didn't expect that from Logan, who was his really close friend.
Not only did God give me a way into this industry during my lowest moment, but he gave me a best friend what I needed, and it's Logan Paul.
Even fans were outraged, and Logan Paul came under a lot of fire for the comments he made. In their next episode, George was noticeably and understandably absent, and Logan issued an apology to George and his fans. He admitted to having made some pretty out-of-line comments, and he believed that the universe had been giving him bad luck for all he said to George. During his time away, George Janko became working actively on his podcast called The George Show. This raised speculations that he'd left the Impaulsive show for good, but George stepped in and clarified that he was still a part of Impaulsive. In his words, he was only hosting his own show on the side to talk about the things he felt he couldn't talk about on Impaulsive. This jab wasn't lost on everyone due to what went down, but the most disconcerting issue seemed to be the fact that George mentioned that this show was just on the side, and he wasn't leaving the biggest podcast in the world for it. This statement sparked questions about whether George was only hanging on to Impaulsive because of the reach the platform gave him. Previous conflicts between Logan and George. Comments under George's April Twitter post about him being ready to speak up were encouraging, as several followers pointed out that Logan has been pretty disrespectful to George over the years. George himself has stated previously on multiple occasions that he could get fired for doing certain things on Impaulsive, and Logan has behaved in ways that seem to confirm the fact. This can particularly be observed in an episode which aired in December of 2021, when George Janko was absent from the podcast. Logan told their audience that he had fired George based on an incident that happened with their previous guests, the Island Boys. The Island Boys are a group of 2 young rappers who were the guests on the podcast the week before George disappeared, and in that episode, George was pretty dismissive of the group the moment they appeared, and they apparently felt disrespected. Following that, Janko was missing from the next few episodes of the podcast, and Logan went ahead to say that he'd fired him because he was disrespectful to their guests. A fact that is now pretty ironic, considering that Logan was the one who disrespected his own co-host this time. However, at that time, it was just a prank, and after much probing from his brother, Jake, Logan actually revealed the truth that George was missing because he'd come down with the flu. In another incident that happened 6 months after that, hostilities arose again when the comedian Bobby Lee showed up as a guest on their podcast. Bobby tested his new friend's limits with his jokes, and he even pushed the podcast's age rating as far as it could go. But after a short while, things got out of hand, and George stood up and walked out after he'd been the primary target for most of Bobby's jokes. The atmosphere changed immediately, and Logan Paul followed him to see if he was coming back, but George didn't come back to complete the episode. This left a confused Bobby Lee wondering what he might have said to upset George so much, as he thought they'd been getting on fine. Some people were also confused because George is sort of a comedian as well. He's known for his laugh-out-loud comedy takes on everyday situations, and he has an impressive fan base because of it. If anything, George Janko shines the most when other comedians come on the podcast, as he can relate and clap back at them, such as on an occasion with Kevin Hart. But he wasn't having it with Bobby, which was a little weird, until their third co-host Mike admitted George had taken the brunt of several insensitive jokes throughout the episode. In light of the current status quo, it really isn't surprising anymore that only Mike noticed that George had been the center of their jokes, and Logan was clueless about why he left. After the podcast, Bobby issued an apology on his knees. He asked George's fans for forgiveness and promised to come back another time with gifts to ask for forgiveness from the man himself. But despite this, things just haven't been the same. Not even when George cleared things up in the next episode and confirmed that he and Bobby were cool. His relationship with Logan Paul especially became strained gradually after that, and in following episodes, the humor wasn't at the same levels as they once were. Before we round off with where the future of their relationship is headed, do you think Logan went too far with George in the past? And that's what built up to cause George to be aggrieved. Don't forget to like and subscribe as you comment below. What's up next for George? Objectively, it wouldn't be surprising if George Janko doesn't return to the Impaulsive podcast, despite his claims that he still wants to be a part of one of the biggest podcasts in the world. The podcast runs through hosts, kind of like the way Jeopardy does. We've seen Spencer Taylor be the co-host and leave, we've also seen Mac replaced, and now George looks to be heading towards the same fate. There's also the fact that George has been more active on his podcast, The George Show, and things seem to be going quite well. He uploads regular episodes on his YouTube channel and has invited guests like Tana Mojo, Nick Antonian, Devin Haney, and Summer Rae. The content doesn't stray too much from the type Impaulsive makes, but the exception is that George can finally get to talk about his faith, which he could never do freely on Impaulsive. No official comment has been made on his departure by Logan or George himself, but some of their audience believe that George leaving was the best option for Impaulsive, as he was always tense and too sensitive. Others think that George deserves to be free, comfortable, and respected. Thus, if George does ultimately end up going his own way, the audience might find themselves having to pick sides, and Impaulsive might find itself with a smaller audience and income. Impaulsive currently has a following of more than 4.8 million people on YouTube alone. In total, the channel's videos have been watched over 700 million times, and on average, people view the channel's videos around 400,000 times each day. Given the ads that play on these videos, it's estimated the channel generates revenue of approximately $3,500 daily. Over the course of a year, this could amount to about $1.3 million from advertisements on the channel's YouTube content. Depending on how things play out, the current revenue being generated could become split up between Impaulsive and The George Show. And since you watched this video to the end, then you'll absolutely love this next one.